Today we will be looking at a case from the second part of the 19th century, so sit back as we go to England. Matilda Hacker was born in 1811 in the historic cathedral city of Canterbury in the county of Kent in England. Her father, John Hacker, was a highly skilled and prosperous stonemason, an occupation of particular relevance in a city famed for its medieval architecture. At the time, Canterbury's population was growing modestly following the Napoleonic Wars. Though the city no longer held the national prominence it once enjoyed in medieval times, it remained an important religious and cultural centre, drawing visitors to its ancient cathedral and preserving a sense of dignified tradition. Matilda's mother, named Mary, kept house and raised her growing family. In addition to Matilda, the Hackers had a younger daughter named Amelia and 2 sons. The family lived during a period when Canterbury, like much of England, was slowly adjusting to the social changes ushered in by industrialisation, though the city itself remained more rural and craft-based than many of the larger towns in the north of the country. Over time, Matilda's father's hard work and astute business dealings brought the family considerable wealth. He eventually acquired several properties in the city, including an impressive row of 4 terraced houses in Blackfriars, an old quarter of Canterbury, known for its narrow lanes and medieval buildings. He also organised and personally funded the addition of a prominent clock in the tower of St George's Church in 1837, a gesture that cemented his legacy. In the 1850s, the Hacker family moved to a large and well-appointed house in Wincheap, an area just beyond the city walls that was gradually transforming from a rural outskirts into a respectable residential district. By this time, the Hackers were a family of substantial means, and Mr. John Hacker was able to provide a comfortable life for his children. As daughters of a prosperous tradesman, Matilda and her younger sister Amelia received a modest but respectable education, typical of middle-class girls in early 19th century England. While formal schooling for girls was limited, they attended the local dame school and were taught subjects such as reading, writing, arithmetic, scripture and needlework, skills that were deemed suitable for young ladies. Though academic learning often took second place to moral instruction and domestic training, the Hacker sisters grew up with the security and refinements that came with their family's rising status. Neither Matilda or Amelia ever married, a fact that raised eyebrows in a society where marriage was often seen as a woman's proper course. As they grew older, the sisters became known in Canterbury not only for their independence, but for their increasingly eccentric appearance and manner. Funded by the generosity of their father, who continued to support them well into his later years, they took to dressing identically in silk dresses and lace shawls, with colourful sashes often secured by oversized buckles. The result was unmistakable, and their presence rarely went unnoticed. The sisters are often seen walking arm in arm along the promenades of Margate and Ramsgate, 2 bustling seaside resorts on the Kent coast that have become fashionable destinations for holidaymakers in the Georgian and Victorian eras. With the expansion of coach roads and later the railway, both towns attracted visitors from London and other places, drawn by the promise of fresh sea air, bathing machines, and public entertainments. Margate with its sandy beaches and assembly rooms, and Ramsgate with its elegant marina and royal harbour, offered the Hacker sisters an ideal stage upon which to parade their singular style. People started referring to them affectionately, if somewhat mockingly, as the Canterbury Belles. When Matilda's father, Mr. John Hacker, died, her behaviour took a further turn towards the eccentric. Despite owning a number of properties in Canterbury and benefiting from the rental income they generated, she developed an unusual and stubborn principle. She refused to pay the local rates and levies required for the upkeep of the municipal services. This resistance quickly escalated to the annoyance of the city authorities. Then, when her sister died, Matilda took full control of the property income, yet she remained resolute in avoiding her civic responsibilities. Instead of resolving her arrears or managing the properties responsibly, she used the income to support a life of quiet evasion and concealing her identity behind false names. In 1875, as Canterbury pressed ahead with modern improvements to its public infrastructure, Matilda found herself again at odds with the local authority. She refused to pay for the newly installed mains water to her properties, an upgrade intended to replace the traditional reliance on river water. Rather than appear in court when summoned, she wrote directly to the local government board. In her letter, she insisted that both she and her tenants had been perfectly well supplied with water from the River Stour, and that the imposition of main supply was both unnecessary and burdensome. She added that the weekly charge of 3p was more than she could afford, and she claimed that the change would inconvenience her for life. The town clerk responded that the river water had been tested and found to be unfit for human consumption, and that the installation of mains water had followed the usual procedure in the interest of public health. Miss Hacker's continued defiance did not go unchallenged. The magistrates eventually issued an order committing her to prison for 2 months for non-payment of water rates, after an earlier attempt to recover the amount through a distress warrant had failed. She was arrested, and following a brief appearance in courts, she was sentenced to serve 2 months at Westgate Prison, Canterbury's stark and imposing house of correction. Though incarceration may have sobered another person, it had little lasting effect on Matilda. To settle her outstanding debts, the authorities seized some of her jewellery, many of which were pieces from the same flamboyant collection that she and her sister had worn during their seaside strolls in Margate and Ramsgate. But the experience did little to alter her course. If anything, it seemed to harden her resolve. Rather than meeting the costs, she took the dramatic step of fleeing the city altogether. She adopted an assumed name and first settled in Brighton, a coastal resort that had by then become a glittering seaside town in the county of Sussex. She then moved to London, where she continued her pattern of evasion. By 1877, she was living under the name Miss Hewish at 4 Euston Square, a respectable lodging house in central London, owned by a gentleman named Mr. Severin Bastendorf. The neighbourhood, with its proximity to the railway station and the ever-shifting population, offered an ideal hiding place for someone determined not to be found. It was curious for a woman who had once been a familiar sight along the Kentish coast, strolling in matching silks with her sister under summer skies, to now be reduced to a life of anonymity. Mr. Bastendorf employed a maid named Miss Hannah Dobbs, a young lady who was originally from the small town of Tavistock in Devon. On Sunday the 14th of October 1877, Mr. Bastendorf asked Miss Dobbs to collect 3 weeks' rent from Miss Hacker, which totalled £1.16. Miss Dobbs went to speak to the lodger and returned with a £5 note, saying that Miss Hacker had asked for change. Mr. Bastendorf handed her the money, and Miss Dobbs went back to Miss Hacker's room. Mr. Bastendorf then went out shooting near Erith, and was later fined for discharging a firearm too close to public buildings. When he returned home, Miss Dobbs informed him that Miss Hacker had left suddenly and would not be returning. Such abrupt departures were not uncommon in a house like theirs, and no particular concern was raised. But curiously, no one heard from Miss Hacker again. It was simply assumed that she had vanished and wanted to stay anonymous, something she had done many times previously. Over 18 months passed before, on the morning of Friday the 9th of May 1879, Mr. Bastendorf sent 15-year-old William Stronham to clean out the coal cellar. The task was simple, nothing out of the ordinary for the young boy who had performed similar duties countless times before. As he descended into the dimly lit cellar, he expected little more than the usual heap of black dust, scattered chunks of coal, and the close, grimy air that clung to the stone walls and floor. But what he found was something far more horrifying. Half hidden beneath the piles of coal and debris lay the decomposing body of a woman. His initial shock left him momentarily unable to move. He noticed that a rope was coiled around the woman's neck, and her legs and both hands were missing. Although he knew little about dead bodies, even he could tell from the stench and the sunken skin that she had been dead for some time. Recoiling in horror, William stumbled back up the cellar stairs and rushed to alert Mr. Bastendorf. The alarm was immediately raised. The police quickly arrived, and a doctor named Dr. Davis examined the remains. He found that the body had been placed on a piece of oilcloth and that a cord, similar to a clothesline, had been tied tightly around the neck. The body was then transported to the mortuary, where it could be examined further. It was concluded that death was caused by a blow to the neck, and although the doctor presumed that the cord may have been used in the attack, he could not be certain, as it had deteriorated so much that it crumbled when he attempted to remove it. However, some things were recognisable: a distinctive silk shawl and a large ornamental brooch. As word spread, people began to gather outside the house, and the police were called in to manage the crowd. The press also quickly started to report the story. Newspapers dubbed it the Euston Square Mystery, and as more details emerged, public interest grew. The doctors struggled to establish a precise time of death, but concluded that the woman had likely died at least a year earlier, and possibly as long as 3 years before the discovery. The uncertainty only made the task of identifying her even more difficult. 4 Euston Square had for a few years served as a lodging house, with a steady stream of tenants passing through, some staying for a few months, others only a few weeks. The records were also incomplete, and those who had stayed had often given false names, making it difficult to trace exactly who had come and gone. Many theories were considered as to who the deceased woman may be. Previous tenants were contacted, along with former employees and past owners of the house, but all to no avail. Eventually, a couple named William and Susan Dobbs, who had read about the mysterious woman found in the coal cellar, contacted officers and said that they believed that the body might be their daughter Hannah. She had once been employed in the house and had left the service of Mr. Bastendorf in September 1878, having had a complicated relationship with the family. However, the police informed Mr. and Mrs. Dobbs that the body could not be their daughter, as she was in prison, serving an 8-month sentence for theft. The body was found to have several missing teeth, prompting officers to contact local dentists in the hope of identifying any patients who had not been seen for some time and whose whereabouts were unknown. One dentist, whose practice was near Euston Square, came forward with a promising lead. 2 years earlier, he had made a cast of a woman's mouth in preparation for fitting her with dentures, but she had never returned to collect them. Although he did not have her name, the cast had been kept, and remarkably, when it was compared to the deceased, it proved to be a match. This confirmed that the woman who had ordered the dentures was the same woman found in the coal cellar. Now, with more specific dates of when the woman had been alive, the police were able to continue with their inquiries. Eventually, they confirmed that the body was that of Miss Matilda Hacker. Her brother identified the clothing found with the remains, and it was established that she had not responded to any letters since October 1877, been seen by anyone, or visited her bank. Edward Hacker told the officers that his sister always carried a gold watch on her person, and when police made inquiries at local pawn shops, they found the watch, and Edward identified it as having belonged to his sister. The individual who had pawned it was Hannah Dobbs, the maid, and the last known person to have seen Miss Hacker before she allegedly left for Euston Square. Miss Dobbs' personal life was now closely examined, revealing details that only deepened the growing mistrust. She had been dismissed from previous households for theft, and it was soon uncovered that she had been involved in a relationship with Peter Bastendorf, the younger brother of her employer. In fact, it was revealed that she had gone to Devon and introduced Peter to her family as her husband. However, their relationship was far from stable, as Peter began to suspect that Hannah was also involved in an improper relationship with his brother. This created more tension and further strain on what was already a very volatile situation. Despite this, Hannah remained in service at 4 Euston Square until September 1878, when without warning she abruptly left the house and never returned. When Inspector Hagan learned that Hannah Dobbs had travelled to the town of Bideford in Devon with Peter Bastendorf, he went there to see what he could uncover. At first, he struggled to obtain information. Miss Dobbs' acquaintances were reluctant to speak and seemed wary of any involvement. But despite these difficulties, he managed to find out that Miss Dobbs had presented her parents with several expensive gifts, including a turquoise ring and a pair of gold earrings, both of which were later identified to having belonged to Miss Hacker. Miss Dobbs was then questioned by 2 police officers and was shown scraps of clothing and a lock of hair from the body found in the cellar. During her interrogation, however, she remained calm, and when asked if she knew anything about the deceased, she said she did not. When she was shown the hair, she said that it could not have belonged to Miss Hacker, as her hair was grey. She was also questioned about why she had been in the possession of so many of Miss Hacker's belongings. Her employer had told officers that when he found Miss Hacker's cash box in her room, he noticed that the lock had been broken, and when he asked Miss Dobbs about it, she had told him that the box was hers. Miss Dobbs told the officers that all these items had come from a deceased uncle in Bideford, but when the police looked into this, they were unable to find any evidence that such a man ever existed. Despite her claims of innocence, Miss Hannah Dobbs was arrested and charged with murder. The trial of 24-year-old Hannah Dobbs opened at the Old Bailey on the 2nd of July 1879 before Mr. Justice Hawkins. The defendant was dressed in black and appeared uneasy as she looked around the courtroom. When asked how she pleaded, she replied, "Not guilty." There was a strong legal team representing the Crown, and the Attorney General opened the case by outlining a chain of circumstantial evidence that he said clearly pointed to Hannah Dobbs as a person responsible for the murder of Miss Matilda Hacker. A particular striking part of evidence came from two wardens from Westminster Prison. They had been escorting the prisoner in a cab to Bow Street Court on a separate charge related to the Euston Square case, and they said that on the journey, Miss Dobbs had mentioned a man named Mr. Finlay, who had been a lodger at the house on Euston Square and who regularly carried a 7-chambered revolver. The warders said that Hannah had told them that she believed he was the murderer and had offered her £50 to keep his secret and go with him to America. However, Miss Dobbs was found to have been in possession of many of Miss Hacker's things, including gold-rimmed glasses, a gold watch and chain, a distinctive brooch, fine lace handkerchiefs, and other items that she had either gifted, pawned, or sold to a jeweller. Many witnesses were called to give evidence, including Mrs. Bastendorf, who told the court that on the day after Miss Hacker had allegedly left the boarding house, she had noticed a large blood stain on the carpet in the room where she had been staying. The prosecution surmised that the body was moved to the cellar by being pulled by the washing line cord when the house was empty, and it had been confirmed that Miss Dobbs and the Bastendorf children were the only people home from 4 p.m. to 11 p.m. on Sunday the 14th. It was also stated that the children were always asleep by 7:30 p.m, leaving time for Miss Dobbs to move the body. The only thing that remained unclear was exactly how and on what date she killed Miss Hacker. It was known that Miss Hacker was alive on the 10th of October, as she had written a letter and sent it. A reply had arrived on the 11th, but it was never collected. The defence suggested that Mr. or Mrs. Bastendorf might have been involved, but the prosecution countered that the defence had presented no evidence or motive to support this. Another key detail undermining this theory was Hannah Dobbs being sent by Mr. Bastendorf to collect rent and returning with a £5 note. Also, they'd asked for the coal cellar to be cleared. Why would the Bastendorfs have done this if they knew it was concealing a body? For the defence, Mr. Mead argued that there was no case to answer. He claimed that there was no evidence proving that the deceased, whoever she was, had been murdered at all, suggesting instead that she could have died from natural causes. The doctors also confirmed that although the corpse was missing some body parts, they had detached as a result of natural decomposition, rather than being deliberately removed. When the trial ended, Mr. Justice Hawkins summed up the case. He told the jury to decide 3 points: whether the body was Miss Hacker's, whether she died by violence, and whether the prisoner, Miss Hannah Dobbs, was responsible. He added that if Miss Hacker had died of natural causes, why was the body then hidden in the coal cellar, and why would Miss Dobbs tell her employer that the lady had gone, but her belongings, including her trunk, remained in the house? The jury deliberated for less than half an hour before returning with a verdict of not guilty. Hannah Dobbs, pale and nearly fainting, sighed with relief when the verdict was read. Throughout the trial, she conducted herself in a calm and dignified manner, but had clearly been aware of the seriousness of the charge. But the story didn't end there. Shortly after her release, Miss Dobbs made a dramatic public statement. In an interview with a journalist, she claimed that she had been having an affair with her former employer, Severin Bastendorf, the owner of 4 Euston Square. Even more sensationally, she alleged that she had become pregnant by him and that he had arranged for her to begin a relationship with his younger brother Peter in order to conceal the affair. She said that she later suffered a miscarriage, but the most explosive claim came last. Miss Dobbs accused Severin Bastendorf of being responsible for the death of Miss Matilda Hacker. She alleged that she had discovered the body in the workshop and that Mr. Bastendorf had threatened her into keeping silence. She said that he gave her jewellery and the watch and chain and told her that if anyone asked where it came from, she must say it was a present from a rich uncle that had now died. She added that she later pawned the jewellery. However, this sensational story continued when she also accused him of murdering another lodger and of beating a homeless boy to death. Both Mr. and Mrs. Bastendorf denied these allegations. However, Miss Dobbs' claims were so detailed, the police arrested Mr. Bastendorf and the authorities ordered that he stand trial. Although there was not enough evidence to convict him of murder, the court found that Mr. Bastendorf had lied under oath in the earlier proceedings, specifically in denying his relationship with Miss Dobbs. For this perjury, he was sentenced to 12 months imprisonment. Not only was he going to serve time behind bars, his business was ruined, and his wife was pregnant with their 5th child. While the police and prosecutors remained convinced that Matilda Hacker had been murdered, no one was ever found guilty of being responsible for the crime. This seemed to be a very sad and undignified end to an eccentric and reclusive lady, once known in Kent as one of the Canterbury Belles. Her life had very much been the subject of local gossip, and now in death, she had once again been drawn into the public view, this time as the victim of a brutal and mysterious murder. The grim notoriety of the case continued, and residents of Euston Square, weary of the association with murder, succeeded in renaming the south side of Euston Square, and it became known as Ensley Gardens, a fresh name intended to erase the dark memory of one of Victorian London's most unsettling mysteries. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. In this video, I mentioned Canterbury, the city where Matilda Hacker was born. If you're curious about what Canterbury looks like today, one of Briefcase's subscribers has started a YouTube channel where she shares shorts from the places she visits. She recently did a very nice one on Canterbury, so I'll leave a link to that video below if any of you would like to check it out. Once again, thanks very much for being here, and I hope to see you all again next week for another Brief Case.